that, we're going to go back to bringing another individual, Mr. Kanye West, right? And between Kanye West and Will Smith, they've been in the news pretty regularly for like the last year and a half at least, right? I attribute some of it to mental health, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. For those that don't know, for those of you that have been living under a rock, a little bit over a week ago at the Oscars, Will Smith did slap Chris Rock. Prior to that, going on for the last, at least for the last, what, 8 months or so, we've had Kanye West, otherwise known as Ye, and he's been going on a rampage ever since he got divorced from the Kardashians. I don't know if that's the Kardashian effect, so we could talk about all that. Like I said, mental health. Regardless of what's been said about the reasons behind, one of the biggest reasons that people haven't really gone into as much is the mental health aspect of it. If you look at what Will Smith wrote, and I believe Stephen, you talked a little bit about that, so I'm going to bring you in really quickly to go over some of the things that he wrote and talked about.
Well, I mean, from my knowledge, it obviously, I think we have to start off by acknowledging the fact that they're two fairly different individuals and fairly different scenarios that kind of occurred. I think with Will Smith's documented situations, it's kind of unique because Will Smith has been known to kind of be public with his own life, his own youth, and we were talking prior to this conversation about, a lot of people are talking about Will and his mental health and whether or not it was appropriate for him to do what he did, and the relationship that he and his wife have. And we discussed the idea of, the fact that it is something that celebrities, I think, become used to, is this idea that they are fodder for the public, and every detail, every scrap of their life is something that we can talk about and degrade, frankly. With Will, his unique relationship with Jada, not getting too graphic, I think we all know that they had some troubles, and part of that was due to his alcoholism, his own admitted alcoholism that he had, which is surprising to learn about Will Smith if you didn't know that already. He also had a unique, estranged relationship with his son, who had come out as bisexual, and that was very hard on him and very hard on his family. And they've reconciled since then, but it created a unique challenge for him. And then Jada spoke on the fact that their relationship was feeling the pains of a Hollywood marriage, as you would call it, which is that an individual will leave for months on a time, or even a year, which she was making, I believe, The Pursuit of Happiness at that time, and a few other movies. So his personal life, I think, has been out there very publicly. And obviously Jada also has been very public with her life, and the fact that she was married to Tupac, or dating Tupac at the time. So I think when we talk about Will, we talk about the challenges of being very famous and having to deal with, again, the public being very aware of what's going on in your own personal life, in your own relationship, and having to deal with speaking on that and not speaking on certain things. And I think, from my understanding, his relationship with Chris Rock is a bit rocky. And Chris has been kind of going hard at Jada for a number of years, from my understanding, with some of the comments that he's been making. So I think there was a moment of reaction that was more of defense for his wife and his reputation, as we talked about. He was challenged sexually. People were challenging his sexuality because of relationship challenges that he had. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I don't have time to get into Kanye West, or Ye as he's known. I think he really does have, and maybe our guest can speak to this a bit more, a lot more challenges when it comes to mental health and his own well-being. And I think the Kim Kardashian situation just does not help. And of course, as the public, we're also piling on him because he's acting out. And that's causing some problems for him because he's acting out in a violent way, which is to me shocking and very sad. I do hope that he does get the help because it's sad to see Kim not feel safe. And she's a very, as we talked about, she's an incredibly powerful woman. So to see her not feel safe is another aspect of this that might be overlooked as well. So,
I mean, with all the aspects, there's so much that we can go into. I'm just going to touch on a text that I got, and the text really said is they behave like they have no self-control, indulgent, pure ignorance. They both know better. I think they're both self-sabotaging, or either that or there's a hidden agenda or objective that we don't see. For those of you that like to comment, there is a call-in line at 519-694-3429. You can hit us up on Facebook, Evolution, or you can hit us up through the evomm3.com website. Yeah, we're going to try to get to all your comments. I want to thank LH for this. We're going to talk about that. Angel, I'm going to bring you in and then I'm going to ask for an assessment, right? Wow. And you know where I'm going to go for the assessment, right? So we're going to talk together an assessment. Where do you stand? Actually, this started out as an all-male podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And then we had some people that they couldn't make it. So I decided, you know what, let me bring in and get a woman's point of view, right? Because I'm going to get into some deeper issues. But right off the hop, I'm going to get a woman's point of view. So fill me in.
Well, just looking at the whole slappity-slap issue.
I like that.
I like that, slappy.
I mean, it's, some might say it's a cry for help, but at the same time, some might say, okay, well, it's a man defending his wife. And then women will say, why do we need to be protected all the time? But that's just some people, right? But I feel like, well, it's a controversial situation, the Will and Kanye, mental health issue, because it's like mental health is a very, very important topic, especially at this time during COVID and everything that we've been going through. As we all know, everybody has something that they're dealing with, and just being able to cope in different situations and different scenarios and expectations. I find celebrities are kind of held to higher standards because everybody expects them to be at their best at all the time. But it's not something that anyone can be at their best at all times. Sometimes there's a cause for reaction. Like in this case, I would have said, like, Chris Rock, he is a comedian. He's got the authority to bring people out of the crowd and say what he needs to say, because that's his job. He makes fun of stuff, and so people could say what Will did was uncalled for. He should have just left it out and then taken it out after. But then at the same time, knowing what his wife was going through, maybe she's shown so much concern about her feelings for her alopecia, and he feels a certain way about that because he's the one who has to comfort her every day. So maybe that kind of hit a nerve and probably led for him to go and say, yo, I got to defend this because I know what my wife is going through. Because in the same instance, it could have been that, well, let's say she was going through chemo and she had to get her head cut off, and someone making a joke of that, it hurts some feelings. But in this case, we now understand it's alopecia. But on a mental health aspect, I found there is a study actually that was done by, I studied today, Colin. I actually studied. It was actually done in Sweden, actually. Give me 1 second. Yeah, it was the University of Sweden. The study itself was carried out by Luke O'Neill, and he had some very interesting facts. He did a study on like 782 celebrities and actors. And it was that actors experience significantly higher levels of depression, anxiety, and stress, and that's normal because they're in the limelight, right? And then you also look at they have 40% of them that were studied had difficulties relaxing and letting go after like performing emotional and physically demanding roles. So for instance, I believe Will had come out of
he come out of King Richard.
Yeah,
yes, right?
He had come out of King Richard. Maybe he still had some trauma from that show, and you could have carried that on. And it's like playing a certain part in, be it a movie or whatever, you are becoming something.
That character,
you become that character, and you've got to carry it on. And so sometimes it doesn't leave you for a while. So those are some of the things. And 40%, as you mentioned, you mentioned that Will is going an alcoholic,
yes.
right? So 80%, like 40% go to drinking.
Yeah.
For coping mechanisms, and go to drinking after acting out in these roles, and also 80% are users of drugs, and be it recreational or prescribed drugs. So there's a whole lot of stuff that you actually see that affects celebrities as a whole. And then the funny thing too, 26% are bullied, on the job.
So good. It actually leads in once again to the mental health aspect.
Yeah.
All these things that you said to me, right, leads into the mental health aspect. And then we touch on the Black community itself.
Yeah.
So before I continue on my way, I'm going to let talk to me about some of your experiences and talk to me a little bit about mental health in the Black community.
I have so many thoughts. There's a verse in the Bible, a lot of obscure verses in the Bible that we don't ever hear because we don't preach about these verses. But this particular verse is, when you see a man at his lowest, do not laugh or make fun at this particular man, lest the Lord sees it and takes his wrath from this person and puts it on you for making fun at a man in his lowest.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to mental health, we can't request greater resources for mental health and at the same time make fun at people in their lowest moments. And so when we talk about mental health is a catchphrase for several different aspects of what it means to have challenges from a psychological level. But mental health and trauma really have two different tracks. And so I can have trauma and have a mental health condition, but because I have a mental health condition, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have trauma, right? And so, like bipolar, if we think about Kanye West, he clearly has symptomology for bipolar, but it may not necessarily come from trauma. When we think of Will Smith and we think of Chris Rock, these two individuals have significant abusive experiences in their childhood. If you read Will Smith's book, in the very first page, he talks about watching his mother being abused and feeling helpless as a child, not to be able to do anything about it. So now you find yourself in a situation where the woman that you love the second most feels offended and triggers happen. Here's a case for you. Here's a family that calls me. My son is in trouble. I interview the son. He's now charged with murder. He's 19 years of age. He's on a train. A group of individuals get on the train and one guy steps on his kicks. And the guy pulls a knife, stabs the guy, overreaction because of the guy touching his shoes. I interviewed the guy to discover he grew up poor. He never really had any shoes, and the shoes that he wore to school, he was always teased because they weren't brand name shoes. And his first pair of really nice shoes he got at the age of 16 because his aunt from overseas sent him a pair of shoes for his birthday. He was coming from school, a group of kids took him, stole his shoes. These shoes that he's now wearing on the train were his first shoes he bought with his first paycheck from his job. He overreacted in the moment, and it had nothing to do with that moment. All about the past.
That's it. And if I could tap into that too, just on the aspect of just like trauma from childhood. I mean, like, there's so many things that also kick in, especially like just looking at the Jada Pinkett Will Smith story, with you telling that story about his child not being able to do something as a child. So that could have also obviously instigated him to be like, you know what, I gotta defend. I'm a man now, you know, and that and looking at that. And there's also a lot of like underlying conditions when it comes to certain things like drinking. Like if you're an alcoholic, if you take different substances, it can also trigger certain underlying conditions that you may have. But I mean, like, as a society, we're quick to say, oh, this one has bipolar, but we do not have that designation to be able to say this person has this certain condition, but we're quick to do it. And it's something that we need to understand, that we cannot diagnose people without actually doing the physical, going through the doctors doing all the steps they need to be able to diagnose someone with something. So it's fun and games when we're just in a fun setting. Like, I know back in the day when the weather, like right now with the weather, people used to always say, oh, it's bipolar outside, you know. So it's like mental health is a very important thing, because as time has gone, I like where we are with it, because people are starting to understand that mental health is just, it's not just having, back in the day it was like a child born with a mental condition, and you know, and they can't do anything, or so now people understand that it could be depression, it could be just anxiety, it could be all these things, and these are general things that we deal with on a daily basis. It's not that we shouldn't deal with them. There's ways of coping with them. Like, I will openly say I suffer from depression, right? But it's something that I have to tell myself every day, put myself in a positive space, that today I'm going to have a good day. You know what I mean? Otherwise, if I don't, I'm going to be grumpy, I'm going to be whatever. But it's always something that there's triggers that will put you in that situation. So you're right about that, and I appreciate you highlighting that to the public
and
about
at the same
triggers.
time, we want to emphasize that, you know, there's no excuse for those behavior, but context gives us understanding for why certain things happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everything has a trigger at the end of the day.
Some people have said the trigger is and was Jada, right?
For reaction?
Yeah, her reaction, because, you know, it's been shown, clips have been shown of Will initially laughing, right? And then they cut the clips back to Jada's reaction. She doesn't look impressed. And then he decides that, you know, he's going to take action. So there was that delayed reaction.
But I think we all do that. And one of the things we want to understand, there are thousands of women throughout the world today that were inappropriately hit on by a male and laughed or smiled. And the male interpreted that as,
it's okay.
it's okay. She's into me.
Yeah.
And what it was fear. It was feeling uncomfortable. It was anxiety. And so a laugh doesn't always mean agreement. It doesn't always mean joy. And sometimes there's a delay effect where you can laugh at something and then the impact really hits you and something else triggers within you. So maybe it had something to do with looking at his wife, maybe not, all speculation, but nonetheless, he had a response because it was triggering for him.
I do think you're correct, though, but I think your natural reaction to a situation, especially a public one, because, I mean, to be honest, that's Chris Rock is a lampoon comedian, so the lampoon, it wasn't just Jada he was picking on, right?
No,
But you're right, that an initial reaction, especially from an individual, as you were pointing out, that is expected to always be on, expected to always be professional, expected to always be perfect. And especially in Will Smith's case, frankly, because Will Smith came
Built
out
a reputation on being
a clean, a
clean,
rapper,
yeah.
a clean actor, a
clean,
rapper.
everything. Life is, you know.
100%. So I think that you're right. I think that his initial reaction was that of, you know, I'm going to laugh along because that's what's expected of me. And but I think, you know, and people also pointed out that Jada had earlier mentioned that she put it in not so nice terms, but she didn't really care how people felt about her hair. However, when you're on national television, you know, in front of 60 million people, and you're being made fun of because of that condition, and as you pointed out, he may have just comforted her, you know, during commercial break. Her reaction was more live and more real, I think. And I think that's where maybe that there was a reaction to that. There was a reaction of, ugh, and a feeling of, because as I said, they've had some issues in the past as well, Chris Rock and Will Smith, so.
But when we think of Jada, Jada's reaction wasn't wrong. She did nothing wrong. People talk about how she controls Will. Her reaction was normal and natural for what she felt in the moment. And her husband looking at her and seeing her reaction had a reaction to that and also to his past. So, you know, I've heard a lot of people kind of pull her down.
Yeah.
But when you think about being embarrassed on national television in front of 60 million people, it takes a different connotation.
Because maybe would have gone home that night and it's like, you couldn't even defend me. We do that. I mean,
You know what? I'm so glad you went there because I mean,
like, if someone does something to me, it's like, you just stood there and laughed. You did nothing about it. So it was his responsibility to defend his wife so that it would maybe. That's like something too.
oh man, I'm so glad you went there. One of the reasons that I'm glad that you went there is things that we also don't talk about.
Yeah.
A woman's I don't even know how to say it. A woman's
Need for protection?
not only a need for protection,
Control
but
of her mind?
Influence.
Yeah.
And the ways and the things that women can do without actually doing it that will cause
Men to react.
Now, if I'm going to take that and I'm going to carry it all the way over.
Yeah.
A married man, or you know what, any kind of man in terms of he's looking at whether it's his daughter, whether it's his wife, he's got to protect, right? And that's, you know what, I'm going to give it that standard, right? But we all know that there are things that mentally that a woman can do that can provoke a man. We looked at it, and he looked at her, and he thought this is what she's feeling. So he went up on stage and he hit somebody. The worst aspect of of things that can happen is when we talk about domestic violence, right? People don't really like to hear this. There are things that women can do that, and like I said, this is not a condoning, this is not saying this is right or anything. I'm even going to go on the record and say I've been in those situations where the mental aspect and you get provoked and you do something, right? A woman can go and say, a man provoked me, a man did this, a man mentally abused me in this way, right? But a man has trouble saying, you know what, yes, I'm wrong, but mentally, this woman abused me, or, you know, had me in such a way that I reacted. Because the minute he opens up his mouth, a woman will say, you're just wrong. Or if you put it out there, women will just right off the bat, they don't want to hear anything, they don't want to hear that their own could have provoked it. They don't even, like I said, they don't want to hear it. It's bam. You know what? You're wrong. And yes, if it leads to, once again, if it leads to domestic violence, it is wrong. But we also have to be understanding to the fact that I think women have a better understanding of psychological aspects in terms of how to push a man's points, right?
Okay.
And the reason I say that, and I'm going to soon finish up, is that, okay, as men, we're supposed to be physically stronger than a woman, right? And so...
Unless you live in Germany.
Unless right? That's what's supposed to be. And there, the other aspect now is that, okay, so men will have physical strength and women will have a certain mental strength, and I'm going to go that way. Like I said, it's, you know, this show is called Real Talk, Straight Talk because we got to talk about all these things, right?
Women do have a feminine power. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
And I've always said when it comes to two consenting adults, men feel that we marry a woman. A woman marries a man. She's just waiting for you to pop the question.
Right.
And make you feel as though you're in power, kind of thing. But I am from the old school when it comes to this particular context. Men are created to protect, provide, and sacrifice for their partner and their family.
I get.
And I don't think there's ever a scenario that justifies a man hitting a woman.
Nah, I never said justification.
I am saying that.
Yeah.
I am saying that. I don't think there's ever a scenario that justifies a man hitting a woman, for the main fact that per average, we are larger, stronger than our companions.
Except
and so
in Germany.
We can always overpower, we can run away, we can push aside. You may understand what caused the provocation and what led to a man lashing out and hitting, but it will never justify the hitting of a woman.
And like I said, once again, I'm not talking about justification. No. I'm talking of the actuality in terms of the trigger, not the justification, because like I said, you know what,
If I could tap into that, Colin, I understand where you're coming from. Like, women, we know psychological warfare.
Whoa, talk the truth, baby. Talk the truth. I'm here right now. Hold on. People, I'm gonna double tape this. This is being taped right now. I'm gonna tape it right now because I need to hear this.
We understand psychological warfare, and sometimes I'm just gonna put it out there. I'm gonna be hated by my sisters and my mothers and my grandma.
I love you, Angel. I do.
But sometimes the reality of it is like the society we are in, right, has put the woman at a weaker point where the man is stronger, as you say, physically. But then on the mental aspect of things, women have got a way of knowing how to get away with certain things. It's like we can cry wolf when it's necessary. You know what I mean? And it's unfortunate for our male counterparts, because sometimes it's like a lot of men go down for things they really shouldn't have gone down for, but because women, as you say, are the weaker and they need to be protected. As he says, men, you're supposed to protect your wife and all this stuff. But unfortunately, there have been men who have taken their power and used it for the wrong purposes, to the point that it has come to that where women are now like, if anything happens, our criminal justice is ready to take the man down. And so I'll just put it out there that, okay, like on the psychological perspective of things, as a woman, I can manipulate a man, but we're never going to talk about that. Like, my husband can be in full control. I could just look at him and he knows to sit down. He knows to talk and he knows to do what, but it's just like that mind, because there's so many things that women can use, like, okay, fine, you're not going to have sex for the rest of the week because of that, or you're not going to do this for the rest. And there's punishment and the cause and consequence, whatever you're talking about.
Thank God I'm old, because a woman can't punish me anymore. Because
no, but I'm just saying, I'm just speaking out loud here, real talk, straight talk, and it's like there's certain things that are going to happen, but unfortunately, I'm passionate about this because I have 3 sons, and I worry because like when they get married, they're gonna be dealing with all this stuff.
Sean, listen to your mom.
Here's the caveat to that. yes, a woman has feminine power in that context, but a woman does not go to that as her default mechanism in a relationship where she feels cherished, respected, and loved.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying
yeah.
this is what all women go through, but, and you brought a good point on that. In a relationship where you're cherished and your husband empowers, makes you feel empowered, you're going to be, women are more submissive in those relationships. They want that man who's going to be caring, who's going to be the protector, the provider, and all that stuff. But then in relationships where they're abused, that psychological side of craziness also comes out.
So then
I
let me
also want to throw a bit of a caveat in here as well. I think there's two things that personally that came to mind when I saw this happen with Will Smith and Chris Rock. The first was Amy Schumer, Wanda Sykes, and forgive me, there was another female on stage that came up on stage and was providing an Oscar, and they made a joke about the fact that there was 3 of them and they were getting paid the same amount as one man.
Yeah.
What if it was Amy Schumer on stage?
Well, I talked about that last week.
And so,
yes.
that was my very first thought. My second thought was when we speak about this, and this is where I tend to look at Will Smith and think, you know, maybe there was something else at play, aside from emotions, as we were talking about as well. His reaction after the slap, when he sat back down, that to me was the disappointing part about the whole factor. But I do want to point out that I think that as we talk about normalization and normalizing, you know, people speaking about depression, people speaking about mental health, I think we also should keep in mind that there is a large segment of the population that's growing up right now that does not feel like this idea of a man should be a protector is the case. And it's not necessarily just because of a challenge to masculinity. It's basically a way of, as you're talking about, of understanding respect and what you're actually supposed to be doing. So what does being a caretaker, a provider mean in today's world?
It's
right?
not the same.
It's not the same as standing up in a bar and defending your girl.
Because there's certain women that have decided that they can
either do it themselves.
Right, they want equalization, right?
Exactly. So I think there is, and I think that's what happened with Will, frankly. I think Will did what I think he thought was an old school way of dealing with something, which was handling it an old school way and saying it directly. And I think the rest of the world kind of looked at it and went, you should have dealt with this behind closed doors, you should have dealt with this in a different way.
Well, what I would say to that is when a trigger happens, it is not necessarily a thinking process.
Yes.
It's a automatic reaction to a situation. It isn't so much that you think and premeditated this is what is going to happen.
Yes.
Once again, it does not justify the behavior, but it gives context to the behavior. And when it comes to, if it had been a female on the stage, I think the trigger would have played itself out differently because in his context of experience, it was a male abusing the female.
And I'm going to go one step further. I went one step further last week when I said it's also, I think, because it's a black male that was on stage. If it was a white male on stage, I don't think it goes down that way. We have, and we talk about this all the time, we have this mental attitude towards each other where, unfortunately, we're seeing it play out in so many things where it's kind of like, you know, I can get at you because I'm bigger than you, or I'm this and I'm that.
Well, that's that is part of their issue is that back and forth apparently between those two individuals. But
even without that, right? You don't think white comedians get up at the Oscars and have said things to people and have picked on specific people? I've heard specific people, and no, I'm not. I can't paraphrase. I'm just saying things that I've heard before, right? People get ridiculed for all kinds of things. I think we take offense when it comes from a black person, as a black man. It's okay if white guy over there says it, but Nah, I ain't taking nothing from you.
But then isn't that an issue of the black community should just respect each other?
And that's where I'm going.
That's
I'm
where
saying
it's
we
like
mentally,
a matter of respect. Like, okay, fine. Yeah, he said that it's a joke. He could have picked on anyone else in the
Right.
house, but he went and picked on a black sister and kind of made fun of her hair. And it's like women are conscious all the time about their hair. And it's something that it's like,
But
I know.
hold on. I've watched. Let me see, Bernie Mac, old
Yeah.
school Bernie Mac, sit down and pick on it and have a. He's having a show and he's picking on white people. He's picking on black people. And he's not even being nice about it, right? He's saying things.
Yeah.
This comes with the territory. If you're a star, right, and you put all that stuff that they decided to put out, right, then people are going to talk about it, right? Part of the mental issue of I think of Will Smith, and we haven't even touched on Kanye as much, right?
Yeah.
But part of the mental issue of Will Smith is, let's break down the last year. In the last year and change, the August Alsina story has been out there, right? In the black community, right? There's people are gonna say, well, what did you look who your wife slept with, and they're gonna laugh at you harder, right? And this happens on a regular this happens on a basis, not even on a star basis. It just happens in the normal aspects of being community, right? There's so much in our communities where, like, I'm not even going to say London, where people are trying to sleep with people's wives and all that stuff, and it's all kinds of games and all that stuff. And so a black male is going to be, man, somebody slept with my wife. And if you know how it came out really truly came out on her podcast, right? And
When it actually came out via the guy that she slept with.
yeah,
August.
yes, no,
Yeah.
he brought it out first,
Yeah.
and then but Will Smith himself actually got the truth, because before it was, the word that was used was entanglement, right? That was the first word. It was entanglement. Then on the show itself, on the podcast, it came out where it wasn't just an entanglement. Then she had to come in and say, well, we were broken up, and so this happened, and yes, it was an affair.
I think, like, it touches on the concept of masculinity, frankly. And it touches, I don't think it just affects the black community, I think it's men in general, because we're talking about challenging or basically making fun of the fact that he couldn't keep his wife, which was the idea, right? Same with Kanye. Kanye is right off his mind right now because of people talking about the fact that he couldn't keep his wife.
But we have a distinct reaction when it's the black male that's talking about it. And I understand, yes, people do talk, right?
Which is a residue from slavery.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
You know,
it's there.
Yeah, it's there, and we need to talk about it. And you know, we as a community, we are probably one of the last groups to embrace the concept of mental health. We are probably one of the last races
Probably we are.
to embrace the concept
Let's not be
of mental health.
right?
I don't know if you remember when Tyrese had a public meltdown about
Yes.
not seeing his daughter for 2 years, and we had all sorts of jokes about it as well, right? And so we have lots of brothers and sisters in our community that struggle, and we make fun at it. And so how can we make fun at our own and then get the issues addressed in ways that they need to be addressed?
And that's a mental imbalance. That's, like you said, you can say it's slavery. That's after effects. That's a whole mental imbalance on a wider scale. It's not just an individual scale. These are after effects that's mentally there for us. We look at certain things and we carry certain attitudes to each other that have been shown. They've been from time.
Yeah.
Right.
And also on the aspect of just going back to comedy, there's back you reference Benny Uncle Bernie, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But different times. Nowadays, it's all about political correctness. And a lot of things are now like, people are so sensitive about a lot of things that people used to joke around about back in the day. What would be acceptable as a joke is not acceptable as a joke now.
I don't know.
Yeah?
Whoa.
Me personally, and I'm probably gonna, my brothers and sisters are probably not gonna like me saying this,
Yeah.
but I'm of an '84 child,
Yeah.
so I'm maybe a little too old to state this, but I tend to see that comedy is meant to elicit a reaction.
Yeah.
And I think there's good comedy and bad comedy, clearly.
Sure.
But I do think that when you're looking at lampooning or you're looking at, highlighting or making fun of today's day and age or today's people, I do think that's, as we were talking about, that kind of comes with the territory when you're a celebrity. I do think there's ways of doing it that's appropriate. I think that, as a writer of a joke, you should be, doing your research, especially if you're going to be in front of millions of people.
Yeah.
But I tend to look at this, the PC, as we call it, or political correctness concept of comedy, and think there are some lines here, and I do think that when you go to a comedy show, you generally are aware of what you're going to see. So I think Chris Rock has been well out there with what type of a comedian he's always been.
Always.
So that's where I find it. I take that because I've heard that reasoning of it's not the great. It's low hanging fruit comedy, and I don't disagree. He certainly had a lot of other jokes that he could have made about Will Smith's career, for example. But he went for something that he knew was clearly going to affect her. And I've also heard on the other side of it that the joke was meant to be empowerment, because if you think about it, G.I. Jane is a hero.
She is,
But as you were talking about, it doesn't really matter what you maybe intended it to be. It's how it's being received, which is where we talk about, and I think this is where it gets murky. You, as a comedian coming out nowadays, you have to be aware of how it's being received. I think Chris Rock is unique because Chris Rock has been out there for so long, but I do think new comedians should be aware of the fact that your audience is well aware of
but looking at it, like you've seen in the news, a lot of comedians have had to apologize for things they've said. So that's why I'm saying nowadays people are more sensitive to a lot of things.
You can't even make a joke nowadays. When you make a joke, you got to look around. You got to be like.
I think of Michael Jackson, and the decades that man went through, being made fun of for a skin condition he had absolutely no control over, and did everything in his power to make himself feel comfortable. Yeah. And yet the entire world had absolutely no problem making fun of this man for decades. And the guy clearly had a lot of other issues going on. Yeah. So I think as it's one of those things we were talking about. I think that it really does depend, and it's but of a lot of comedians' jokes, right, and music videos. So I think it really does depend on the individual. I think the other last thing I'll mention is that celebrities as well are, as you were talking about, higher standard, held to a higher standard. There is too many yes people around a celebrity. Yeah. So I think Kanye's experience is probably enforced by the fact that he's got a lot of yes people. Will Smith, during the Oscars, was asked to leave and refused. That's because too many yes people around him, frankly, over the years. Like, you should have been embarrassed at that point to say, I'm going to walk away. But he stuck around, and he stuck around at the after party and partied it up and had a good time. And so it's like and the same with Jada. So there's too many yes people sometimes around celebrities in general for them to, I think, really understand, you know what, this isn't the best way of handling this, or you know what, I do need to seek assistance, or I do need additional help.
The yes people term actually expands to the actual organization in itself of the awards and the people in the audience, because they gave a standing ovation. And so you're sending a very strong message. Yeah. And another person that we haven't talked about in this entire ordeal is Chris Rock himself.
Yeah. Yep.
How he felt.
Because he too went through his own trauma of bullying in school on a consistent basis. And, when you think about it, who else would have stood there after the slap, kept your cool, and still went on? And so he had years as a child of being disciplined to respond that particular way because of his own trauma.
Yeah.
A couple of days afterwards, Jamaican comedian Major Hype did a skit on I saw it. It was on Facebook, and he's giving it from the Adman experience. He's like, "Listen, if that happened to me," and he had. Actually, I'll go through the skit. In the skit, you know, he's interlaying it with the actual scenes from the Oscars. So Will Smith comes up, and he's like, "Where you think y'all go? Where are you going?" Right? And he opens up and he has this thing right here, and he pulls it out and he says, "Oh, you think you're coming here to do this to me?" Right? Yeah. All that kind of stuff is been afterwards. Yeah. Right?
But there's also an aspect that I also wanted to highlight, like religion. When you started talking, you brought up a verse in the Bible about laughing at people with mental health and stuff. And there's also a part that was very powerful to me as a religious person, is Denzel Washington and Tyler Perry actually prayed with Will. Yes. They prayed with Will about that, and it's like and we also have to look at that in the Black community, as you know, going up in any community. Anyway, anyone going up in certain places, the devil will try and come in and try and shake you in certain ways. And like Denzel went on to say that when the devil sees that something great is about to happen, you know, he's going to shake you in certain ways that will make you kind of lose your balance.
And you know the challenge with what you just said, which I acknowledge by these two guys as well. People actually ridiculed Denzel and Tyler Perry for doing that.
For bringing in the spiritual aspect.
For going and consoling a guy at his lower point. People actually ridicule that, right? And so we need to recognize in our community that even when someone does something that we should not praise, and we recognize that this is something severe on the mental health spectrum, it's okay to console and it's okay to forgive. It's okay to help a person work through. They still have to pay the consequences of specific behaviors, but it is okay for us to come around our brothers and sisters and help a person work through his or her challenges.
And with that too, like looking at people who are going through alcoholism, going through stuff, when they go through their steps of recovery, there's a religious component to it that helps them like be accountable to certain things. So like when we also look at it, Kanye, we didn't touch on Kanye and we don't have much time, but Kanye West, I feel, has gone through all his mental health issues, his bipolar and all this stuff, and also there's also trauma in losing a parent. You know what I mean? The loss of his mom, who was his backbone, is like, even through his songs that are coming out, he still wants to hail his mom to a high standard. So it's like there's trauma of that, and then now losing a wife to divorce. Those are also challenges that for someone who's gone through like childhood trauma or whatever trauma he's gone through to the age where he is right now, those are some challenges that can trigger certain reactions and trigger certain ways that he acts. Like for instance, divorce is not an easy thing for anybody. I mean, like for men, if you uphold your relationship sacred and then losing that, it can make you go local, because it's like one of those things that there's some people who actually say from childhood they want to be a father, they want to be a husband, they want to be that, and then to lose that and then just be divorced or grief. Going through it's severe grief. So like people act out in so many different ways, the alcoholism, and a lot of people experience that, and now divorce is a common thing, and it's sad that maybe if Kanye's mom was there, he would have been able to help him keep his relationship together, or there's not a lot of people who can help you keep. Yes, there's counseling, I'm glad you do the counseling thing, but then it's like it's brief. It's for some it works, it helps, but then there's some people who live in that trauma and they're gonna go ahead and just feel like I can't get over this. And then as a result, life goes on with their trauma, and they're grieving the rest of their lives. So yeah, so I feel like Kanye is just in a place where he hasn't healed from a lot of things, and as a result, he's acting out. And the pain of divorce, the pain of losing his mom, and just not knowing where to go with things. That's where I will end my conversation for now.
Here we are, and it's as usual. Sometimes when the conversation gets deepest is when these guys look over, and my crew's been looking over at us for the last 5 minutes, going and they're waving. And people, you know, the wave I've shown you before. It starts off like this. Actually, it starts off like this, and then it gets like this, and then it gets like this, and then I see some angry faces. But in all aspects of this, right? I want to touch on a final point, and I'm going to touch on a point that Stephen said before about the yes people, right? So all this has happened, right? Do you think Will Smith, do you think Kanye, do you think not only have they looked at this stuff, right, and said, hey, maybe, you know what, yes, I knew I had a problem, but maybe this problem is, you know, it's gone to another level. I need some help. Do they have the people around them that'll say, hey, listen, you know what, before you make a next move, let's plot and see, you know, where you get that help. And then as people watching, all right, there's going to be that time where where some will laugh and there'll be jokes and there'll be this and that. But for the broader communities, and I'm going to touch especially on our black communities that are so slow to recognize mental health. Not only slow to recognize, but slow to actually it's not only recognize, but not embrace, but at least look into and say, hey, you know what, this is a problem within our community, because a lot of our communities, whether it's African or whether it's Canadian or Caribbean, we've frowned on mental health. We've frowned on people that have gone to seek help for mental health, for mental health. Are we looking at these two people and say, hey, with all the things that these people have, and they're supposed to be successful and this and that, and they've got money and they've got this life, these are two serious incidents that happen. Well, there's many incidents with Kanye, and one very serious incident with Will Smith. And to put the seriousness in context, I said it last week, the last Oscars was the first time that it was directed and written by black people. The very first time. And you know, that's historic in the making, because you know, if you remember 2016, there was no black people that were recognized for anything in the Oscars. So 2016, 2022, here we are, and they actually brought in a black crew to write and to direct and to get this thing going, and a black individual slaps another black individual. If that isn't a sign that, hey, you know what, there's something mentally wrong, and if that doesn't help us and show us that maybe on a smaller scale we need to look and recognize if it's in our family, if it's around our friends, and then talk to one another, then I'm not sure. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank all our guests. Every so often we're going to talk on the mental health issue. I'm going to try to look straight in the cameras as I get to this. Which camera am I looking at? Am I looking there? So it's a little off. Every so often we're going to touch on mental health. I believe it's very important. So it's usually every 6 weeks or 6 or 8 weeks we do a segment. Like I said, I wanted this to be a men's only segment, because I believe more importantly that in our communities, our men are behind our women, or women have always, I think, been in the forefront of the mental health aspect. Please, people, if you're out there and you know somebody, after the laughter, let's really look into what's going on. And hey, we've got a mental health professional. They're in all communities, not just London. They're in Toronto. They're everywhere. Don't be afraid. Reach out. It's so important that the precedent that we set for the generations to come after. This has been another edition of Real Talk, Straight Talk. Next week we get back and talk about, there's some artists that contacted us and talk about they're not being able to get their due rewards, or even to be able to publish and to do the things that they want to do. We talked on this a few weeks ago with the ISO group. We've got some actual artists coming on next week to talk some more about that. So we've got the artists on next week. Once again, this is another edition of Real Talk Straight Talk. On behalf of my guests and our sponsors, I'm going to try to list them real quick. Ween Community Center, Up Like 7 Barbershop, where we're shooting today, the Fix Hair Salon, United Cuts, the Ladies of Ollie, Commercial Interior Design, Soul Kitchen Radio, and finally Rhythm Movements Community Association. Oh, I actually almost forgot Pride and RBC. So to all the sponsors, thank you for being a part of this. To all of you that watch, and you know, we're going to be on YouTube. This episode will be on YouTube on Friday. This episode will also be replayed on Thursday night, evomm3.com. And like we like to say, this is a fade to black. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.